All right, welcome to the ULEAD Promising Practices panel on attendance and research strategies. We have great panelists with us today that are going to share their expertise and are bringing together kind of the research world and the practitioner world. So we will do some introductions. Aspen, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. My name is Aspen Florence, and I am the attendance specialist for the State Board of Education.
Brooke?
Hi, my name is Brooke Anderson, and I'm the data scientist for Jordan School District.
Nicole?
I am Nicole Pyle. I am an associate professor of adolescent literacy and secondary education at Utah State University and currently work on a student attendance ULEAD grant.
Yeah, and we're really excited. Nicole and Brooke both have some experience with our innovative practice reports. So Brooke worked on one with our Utah Teacher Fellows, and Nicole is working on one now. Sierra?
Hi, I'm Sierra Marsh. I'm the Prevention and YC Coordinator with Murray City School District.
And Colleen?
Yep, I'm Colleen Smith. I'm the principal at Copperview Elementary in Canyon School District.
And super excited to have Sierra and Colleen with us since they are actually working in the schools and kind of bring that practitioner experience and come highly recommended from our attendance friends at the State Board of Education. So I'm going to give everybody just a quick overview of ULEAD, what it is, what we do. So ULEAD is Utah Leading Through Effective, Actionable, and Dynamic Education. And I'm Megan Everett. I'm the director, and I'll be facilitating our conversation today. ULEAD was started to do these four things. So to research, curate, connect, and report. So with research, we really want to initiate and disseminate reports on practices that are going really well in our schools. We get to be the Sunshine Committee, which is really fun. We curate those together in a searchable repository so everyone can learn from the great practices. And then we connect people with them. We promote innovation and collaboration statewide in a variety of ways. And then we get to report those back to our legislature and specifically tell them how they could remove barriers that help people implement these great practices. So this is kind of how it works. We look at the data and say, who's doing this really well? Who's our positive outlier? And then we pair researchers to go in and look at the practice. So how are they getting to be that great outlier? We want to know if that practice can be adopted or replicated or shared in other ways. And then we share and connect through things like this webinar today. The reason we're talking about attendance is because it's one of our focus priorities. We have a steering committee that has representatives from traditional public and charter schools, but really importantly, we have a superintendent, principals, and teachers that tell us the things that are important to them. They help us to identify what kind of outliers we should be looking for and partnering those with the research partners. And one of the things that has come up continually is how big of a deal attendance is. And so that's why we're having this conversation now. And so with that, we will just jump into having a chat about attendance. So Aspen, you're at the state. I was hoping you could tell us just a little bit about the difference between absentee rates, chronic absenteeism. What are we talking about?
Yeah, so in the state of Utah, we actually just defined in state statute what chronically absent means. So this would be in the state of Utah, any student that's missed 10% or more of school for any reason. And so students that whether they're missing for a baseball practice or they're sick or they went on vacation or they are at the gas station hanging out, those would all be reasons that a student would fit into that absent rate. So and the way that absence is calculated in the state of Utah is when a student misses more than half of the school day. And so if they're in a secondary setting, they may be absent for a period in a day, but that wouldn't count towards this chronically absent rate. And then we obviously look at other data points where we're kind of disaggregating when a student is missing for excused absences versus unexcused absences, and that fits into some of our additional kind of statutes that way and how we engage with students.
Thanks. I don't know if that just beeped for you. It did for me. Hopefully it didn't distract you too much. So What are the current trends and issues? What are you seeing going on in attendance in your various roles and areas? Maybe Colleen, if you want to start from kind of the school level.
Um, yeah, I think I would say that absenteeism looks different than this is actually my second time around being a principal. I was a principal for several years, went to the district office and then came back. And as I'm here now at this school, it seems like attendance is a more challenging issue to address. Some of the strategies that have worked in the past maybe aren't working as well now. So I really think that it's just a bigger need for more innovative or newer practices. Be my answer.
Yeah, that's really interesting that practices that have maybe worked before don't feel like they're being as successful now. Do you think that that is just following COVID, or is that maybe just kind of the way of the world at the moment?
I don't know because the 3 years that I was gone was the like 3 year kind of left right during 2020. So I came back as everybody was kind of returning back into schools. I would assume so. It seems like some of the parent responses we get when we ask them about absenteeism is around recognizing that they got into some pretty poor habits during those years with COVID, kind of, and now they're just trying to work on establishing better routines and patterns. But so,
And now
maybe, yeah.
I've got a question for you, Colleen. I love talking to principals about attendance because one of the things that I've heard from so many principals in Jordan District is that they'll talk with parents and the parents will say, "Well, I didn't know they were absent that often."
Yeah.
Is that a conversation that you have a lot too?
Yeah, not as much. Yes, I've had that conversation a few times. A lot of our families do recognize that it's pretty chronic, but that there are just other challenges that make it difficult. But the ones that don't notice it as much are the ones that usually are the ones that the teachers, so we've got a system of communication within our school. It's usually at the teacher level that they're getting probably more of those answers because it's in that like 5 to 8 absences. So the parents are feeling more like, oh, thanks for alerting me. I didn't realize it had been that many. By the time I'm talking to them, it's like 40 absences, 50, like they know that they've been absent quite a bit and they know that they've had lots of communication with lots of other people in our building. So that could also just be that by the time they get to me, they're very aware that absenteeism is an issue.
Thanks.
Yep.
Sierra, so at the district level, what are you seeing similar trends? You're in two different districts, but
Well, just one district, just Murray. Oh, but from Colleen, yes, and Canyons. Yes and no. I don't have necessarily those day-to-day conversations with families to the same degree that Colleen would, but I do work closely with folks who do engage in those conversations regularly. And then we also, on the district level, have conversations with families and parents. I would agree that shift from COVID learning to we're back in school and we're pushing back in school has been hard. I know there are a lot of like misconceptions maybe around the impact of not being in person for learning in terms of, oh, the work is online, so my kid can just make it up on their Chromebook and that's great. So there's a lot of work that we are having to do with families to talk about the impact of student engagement in the classroom versus just, you know, the checkbox of I got my homework submitted or I watched that video. But additionally, a lot of the conversations we're having with families is that shift to understanding what chronic absenteeism is. Aspen, you mentioned that it was like adopted into statute, right? That chronic absenteeism is missing 10% or more for any reason. And that has been a big mind shift, I think, for a lot of folks, and we're still working on that. In fact, we recently pushed out some attendance perception surveys to our stakeholders, and some of the feedback, especially from parents, was it's actually not the school's responsibility. Like, don't worry about it. It's the parent's job to get the kid to school. If the kid's not in school, it's not like, don't stress. Like, you just don't teach that student that day, without maybe recognizing the impact of, well, if a certain number of your students, peers aren't in their classroom, your teacher's going to have to spend a whole lot of time going back and reteaching, and then your student isn't getting through maybe as much content or curriculum as you would like them to. And then, of course, the impact of the community in the classroom in and of itself, right? Those peers being able to have relationships that cultivate an environment that's conducive to learning. So definitely a lot of conversations with parents all across the spectrum around attendance and its impact, whether it's working on addressing those barriers that are keeping kids from school, or trying to work with families to push that in-person learning environment.
Thanks. And Brooke, I know that you're not in the same role in terms of being in prevention, but you do work with the data, and you also talked with people when you did the Utah Fellows report with ULEAD. So what were some of the kind of issues people were trying to attend to?
Oh, very much what Colleen and, oh, what's her name? Let me look, I'll have her. Sarah, there we go. Sarah already mentioned. What we found was schools that had actually, improved or maintained their attendance over the very rocky post-pandemic years were engaged in exactly those kinds of strategies. They set up structures where there was more communication home at the teacher level, at the school level, where they could actually influence parents to say, hey, it's important that your child attends. It's not just, about how easy the makeup work is. They need to be in school learning with their peers. And so, a lot of what we found with the schools that we did work with was just the emphasis on communicating with parents and educating parents. Some of the schools were very explicit in the need for parent education, sitting down with parents and saying, you know what, you can make your child go to school when they don't want to go, and that's okay. And just teaching them strategies like that. So that's kind of what I've been seeing. That's what I saw with the focus groups we did for the ULEAD report, was the emphasis on communication and parent education. And then what I've seen working with the schools in Jordan District after, as we kind of go through and look at their student achievement and think, okay, what can we do for these groups of students who are just not achieving where we think they should be? And a lot of it focuses on, let's get them engaged, get back engaged in the classroom. And how do we do that?
Yeah. Thanks for that. And we're going to talk about some of those specific strategies in a bit, things that have been working for you all, and maybe things you've tried that didn't work, and that's fine too. I know some of the issues that came up when we talked with our steering committee, the teachers and principals were telling us some very specific needs, right? So a student might be tardy, but they might be 5 minutes tardy or 20 minutes tardy or 2 class periods tardy, and feeling like those were all different kinds of needs. We heard from high school in particular, more so than elementary school, that sometimes students were on campus, but were not actually in the classroom, which is a different kind of tardy or a different kind of absence. I know for my own personal children, one of them plays varsity sports. And so there's a lot of absenteeism with that. And, that's sometimes seen as more of an okay absence, but he's still not in the classroom. And I see the impact of that. I think it's really important when we talk about kids not being in school to have these conversations with people that are actually in the schools and talking to parents and talking to students about their absenteeism, because that just lends a different perspective to what we think is sometimes simple, right? You're there, you're not there. And it's not quite that simple. So, thinking Nicole and Brooke, you might be well positioned to answer this, but what kind of research is there about attendance, and where are there some holes or things we still need to learn?
Well, I'm just going to say, from my end, as far as the data goes, we really don't have an accurate picture of attendance in our state yet. We are getting an accurate picture of attendance in our state because we, prior to the legislation that happened, was it 2021? It was around the pandemic, but where they defined what an absence was at the state level, we're all kind of doing our own thing as far as the definitions went. which made it very, very hard to get a clear picture of what was going on statewide. And it also made it very hard the way that an absent day was defined. I'm very glad to hear from Aspen that it is now you have to miss half or more of your day, because it used to be you were only counted as absent by USBE if you missed the entire day. If every single attendance period was marked absent, then you were absent, which meant that our absences were drastically undercounted. So as far as where we are in the research is we're just getting a clear picture of what the situation is. We just need to be able to describe reality.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand how difficult that is to measure attendance when it's both on the research level and with being a former high school teacher myself. So ultimately, when students are not present, they're missing out on academics and they're missing out on what it is that they're expected to be able to do while attending school. So we had two dropout prevention federal grants when I was at UT Austin, and our way of counting absences was regardless if it's excused or unexcused, that is ultimately it's an absence. And so that idea of not being there is like, it didn't really matter if it was excused or unexcused. And while Megan's saying, yes, there's these different, there's like on the spectrum of what's okay, right? And like, oh, if you're an athletic event, it's an okay, and I know that schools or personnel in schools can get into the habit of justifying absences, but in the end, if you are not present, then you are missing out on what it is that's expected of you. And then ultimately the consequences are potentially very negative for our students. So I think the measurement is so hard, but it's also could be considered pretty simple. Like it's hard if you're going to look at all the varying levels of, the justifications, but if you're not there, it's absent. And then what do we do? And then and so do we work on the intervention side of it? Do we work on the prevention side of it? The measurement side of it is to me not of the biggest concern when we talk about attendance, because it can be, in my mind, pretty simple, but it's not. I understand how it's not simple, but I'm trying to make the argument that if it is simple, then we can focus our energy on what the other two areas of concern are, which is the prevention and the intervention.
That's true. Having accurate data is kind of almost a side quest. This attendance.
Right. But you're right. The point though is like, okay, so if we don't have accurate data, then we didn't start with the accurate baseline, right? And then we don't even know what we're measuring. So we do need to have the data we do need to have consensus on how we're measuring attendance. But my argument is like, oh, if it's just you're not there, then we can work from that and at least start somewhere. But I think when you think about data, if you're thinking about it at the student level and the school level, and from the research, that it's mostly reported at the school level. And we know that in the state of Utah, you can pick out whatever school you want, elementary, secondary, whichever school type you want, and then look at the attendance rate or the absenteeism rate, whichever way you want to look at it. And so getting a clear consensus on how that percentage is calculated so that we can understand how it's being reported by school is necessary for us so that we know year after year what we're comparing against.
Right. And I think at the state level, we also would need to we have so many modalities of school in Utah as well. We need to be clear on, when we're calculating an attendance rate, we're only looking at brick and mortar who actually take a class period by class period attendance. So we've got, if we're throwing in our attendance from our online schools, they're reporting wonderful attendance, which I don't think is true at all. Maybe throwing some things off.
Megan, some things that I would add to some gaps in the data. So I agree with consensus around like coding and how we're calculating, but something that we haven't really done a nice job of is we have kind of those lagging indicators of student, whether they're absent or present, right? But some of the other data pieces, I think Sierra mentioned it earlier, is like, parental surveys, like our family surveys around like, why does your student come to school? Why doesn't your student come to school? And student perception surveys as far as what is it about school that makes you attend? What is it about school that doesn't? And I think that's a piece we've pushed so hard to communicate that attendance is important. Like all of our campaigns have been, make sure you come, don't miss more than 9 days, blah, 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 all of that, where I really think that we've missed the boat on, this isn't just one-way communication telling people to come to school. Like if we want to, and I think Colleen touched on it too, like the idea that, yeah, 5 years ago that worked, right? That was the simple solution, tell people to come. Now we're asking, I think we're lacking in the data on why aren't you coming? So we don't continue to use the same strategies that we thought worked that maybe don't anymore. And even Brooke was just saying the change in the coding there. Our data prior to the pandemic indicated we only had about 14% of our students that were chronically absent. But if we were only counting full days of absence in that, like that we can't even, doesn't count. Like we can't match those anymore, right? And so that's a good aha there. So, but I think part of what we're missing in our data right now is the leading indicators and triangulation of data rather than just that one lagging indicator.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so just for people that might not be familiar with the terms like leading and lagging indicators. So what you're saying is there are reasons that the kids are missing. Those are like the root cause, right? And then the attendance data is the lagging behind that. The attendance data says, oh, something else is going on. But the leading indicator is there was something that kept them from class, whatever it is. Are those things that Colleen and Sierra, that you are looking for? Do you talk to families and parents about those indicators that we are kind of missing out on the bigger data collection of?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We were pretty impressed and excited actually with our community's participation. We did some stakeholder surveys this year. We pushed I was pulling it up right now so I could give you accurate numbers. We did our student attendance survey with just students in 4th grade and up. It was all like parents knew in advance. They saw all the questions in advance and could decide whether or not their student was going to participate. But we had over 1,900 students, and our district is small, so that is like a hefty chunk of our district. Students participate in that survey, and just like Aspen was saying, hearing from them about what is keeping them and what motivates them, right? Like more than anything, we wanted to know what's motivating and what would help get them to school more. So we did that one, and then we did push out a teacher survey as well, which was highlighting for me the connection that they felt like they had with their students. Most of them, let's see, 77% of them felt like all of their students had a positive relationship with at least one adult in school. And that was one of the things that became clear in the student perception survey as well. They wanted 2 things primarily that were in our immediate control. They also wanted like the schedule to be changed, but I don't have control over that right now. But they wanted an adult to check in with at the school, and they wanted alarm clocks. Which is not really what I expected. I expected maybe like, I want food every day, which we know is motivating to students, especially our adolescents. But we have been handing out these alarm clocks so much this year because the students are really wanting them. And then, like I mentioned earlier, that parent perception survey has been really helpful as well, especially in getting to know what parents actually feel about attendance. We asked the question, how much school do you think is acceptable for your student to miss? And 5% of those parents said 18 or more days. So that's that's 5%. It's small, but that's still 5% of our district that are going to fall within that chronically absent area unless we can do some education, as Brooke was mentioning earlier. So fortunately, the majority of them were, less than 10. So that's good. But Yeah, I would speak highly for the need to do these perception surveys so you can get a sense of what your community is feeling about attendance, and then that drives the work that you do.
Yeah. Colleen, do you have the same, I would imagine that you have a lot more personalized conversations among parents and students. But do you find some of that same perception to be useful?
Yeah, we did collect some survey data from our families. It's a little bit more tricky to rely on that. We didn't get a huge response, but we do have, what we did was we took the FBAT and kind of broke it up into smaller sections. So once a student's been absent for a few days, the nurse, our school nurse, is the first person to call, and she asks a series of questions that kind of rules out any sort of medical issue. If they're absent a few more days, our community school facilitator calls, asks a few more. So we're just trying to gather the information as we go to try and figure out, if we haven't figured out why the student's absent yet, we just connect them with each of those resources strategically and then ask a few more questions to build those relationships and maybe get to the root of the issue.
Yeah. No, that's great. And Aspen, that sounds a lot to me like some of the discussion I've heard you have around Panorama. And I know not all schools are using that, but where you can kind of track the different things you're doing and what interventions you've done. So is there a system for that people should be following?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is the work that we're currently doing as a state. So in recent legislation, every district will have, well, every school will have an early warning system. Some already have those built, some don't yet, and Panorama is one that many districts are using, and that does kind of two things. That allows for us to triangulate data, so we're able to quickly determine is attendance affecting academics, is behavior affecting attendance, things along those lines that we can't do otherwise, or that it takes a lot of time to do otherwise. And then the second component to that, and Canyons has their own dashboard that does this really well. So that's what Clean was just talking about. But the idea of being able to choose an intervention based on your data, implement the intervention and track the data, and have a common way for everyone to understand that that intervention occurred and the results of it, and then be able to also track, do the interventions that we're using actually work based on the kind of composite of that, is something that's going to be a huge benefit moving forward based on what we're currently doing. But in the state right now, we'll have a kind of a tier 1 handbook or playbook, and then a tier 2 as well, that will outline some of those interventions that they can use, what the actual intervention looks like, what it looks like ran with fidelity, how you attract data, so that they're easily kind of not easily. Interventions are hard to implement, so I want to be clear. There's never a time an intervention's easy, but they're implemented, and then we can track, effectiveness that way.
So I'm already hearing some really good things, right? I'm sorry, Brooke, go ahead.
I was going to jump in and just say, 2 thumbs up to Panorama. That's what we use in Jordan District. It's been great teaching, school teams how to use that to track their attendance data, because it's very easy for them to do so. And they're very engaged in using that to say, okay, we're going to try it. And we know immediately how it's going, which is great.
So that's really speaking to this, having good data, and not just big picture data systems, right? Where the state can track who's attending and not, but really individualized student data around what we've done for each kid. I'm wondering what specific strategies have been useful, or you're getting returns on. And Colleen, I would take it to the school level first.
Okay, I was laughing again because I was thinking, I don't know that I've got a lot of success rates. There are some
Well, you can
things
tell
that
us
have been
something you tried that failed, and we know to avoid it too.
No, there have been a lot of things that have been successful. I think I'm still going to go back to communication and aligning those resources with that communication. So making sure that the families not only hear that attendance is important from the teacher, but it's the teacher, it's the nurse, it's our school psychologist, it's our community school facilitator, it's myself. But also, I think the thing that has worked really well here, based off of, so there was a 2020 study about benefits framing messaging around attendance instead of the like, if you miss, this is going to happen, or if you miss, this is going to happen, where it's shorter messages through, they look like text messages. We use Parent Square, and it's just focused around the students who are chronically absent, and it's one sentence informative. Did you know that when you miss blah, 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 or it's allergy season, here's how you can address allergies to minimize absences, contact our nurse for more information, or so we send those out. We were going to do it as that study outlined, where it was targeted message to just the people with chronic absenteeism. Our chronic absenteeism rate here at our school is pretty much everyone except for about 50 students. So we just send it out as a weekly message for all of our families. And that has been, I think the benefits framing of why we attend or how we can support you in attending regularly has been beneficial.
That's a great point and a great strategy. I know that there has been a lot of discussion around that, right? We were meeting with some people from Attendance Works and having that conversation around, we know the negative outcomes if you don't attend, but making sure people know the positive outcomes of having that community and all. So Sierra, are there other different strategies that you all have found to be successful?
Yeah, at all of our schools are doing really wonderful things. We adopted a district-wide kind of attendance campaign. The Murray district slogan, if you will, is "We Are Murray," and so we just tapped into that. So the district-wide theme this year has been "We Are Murray, We Are Here," and each of our schools have adopted that or made tweaks to it to fit their own community. I would say the biggest thing we did as a district is we hired folks. We used money from the prevention block grant through the state, but we hired folks to specifically work on attendance. So we hired 2 district attendance specialists who, shout out to them, because they are truly phenomenal human beings who are the perfect team and are dedicated to improve student outcomes. So one of those individuals is like very data driven and pulls numbers and makes graphs like every day just to see where we are, and who spearheaded our direction to making sure that all of our attendance coding was on the same page across the district. And then another individual who is deeply motivated by individual student interactions, and together they make a really great team. And so because they are specific to that, they've been able to do a lot and reach out to schools. They work directly with schools regularly, like going in and supporting school social workers to address student needs on an individual level. We also are running monthly attendance matters classes, and we've kind of shifted each month like who our target audience is for that group that we invite, just to kind of try out things that work. But what we've found over time, and again, like kudos to our team for just collecting amazing data, we have tracked the outcomes of this class throughout the year. And so I'm so excited to share this with you. Our elementary students, even if they did not attend the class, but just were invited by a warm, kind, positive messaging around like, hey, we want to help support you and getting you on track around attendance, even if they didn't attend the class, but we asked them to be there. After 120 days of being invited, 68% of those students have improved in their attendance, which I think is pretty awesome. Like, they didn't even show up, but we just told them, hey, we really want you here. and they showed up. And obviously we know that there are challenges to barriers to attendance that we can't solve with a letter like that, but that's been really impactful. And then our high school students that we invited, if they showed up, now high school, it's very different. They have to actually show up to the class, which is very kind of motivational interviewing, goal setting focused. 65% of those students have improved in their attendance even after 120 days of attending the class. So that has been something that we have seen to be very effective. And the students who haven't been able to attend that class for whatever reason, those 2 attendance specialists have been going out to those schools to meet with those families and students to help with goal setting and kind of taking the class to them, which has been really helpful too. So my number one strategy is like hire people that are specific to attendance that can dedicate their time to that because they do such amazing work.
I was
That's awesome.
reading a paper today about attendance out of Michigan. I'll post the link in the chat, but basically it's the same thing. You know, they focus on these school districts focused on hiring people to really just spend time talking to students and working with students. Because there's nothing that beats that face-to-face.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
and Rick, you also dropped in a reference to, I think one of the Todd Rogers pieces with the attendance, and it spoke to
That's
what
the one that Colleen was referring to.
yeah, and it spoke to what Colleen was saying. So, Todd Rogers is a researcher in behavioral insights that works a lot in the attendance field, and they found those pieces around just that very succinct, very clear, short messaging, like Colleen was speaking about, had a lot of impact. What other kinds of cool?
Megan, can I go back really quickly to
Yeah,
Sierra?
please do.
So I wanted to make sure that Sierra was the one who shared about her family nights because we just took her idea and replicated it at the school level. Sierra knows that we like when I say took it, we literally took all of her stuff. But the only difference was that it was here at a school level instead of at the district level. I just wanted to share similar data to echo that was one of the most powerful things that we did see. And consistent with Sierra, the people that were invited but did not attend that were in the at-risk category. So anybody at risk, chronic or chronically absent got an invite. The at-risk category, 100% of those people that did not attend but were in at-risk actually improved their attendance. And then we had a 79% of the students who were invited and attended that family evening have improved their attendance from that as well.
That brings me so much joy, and I'm so thrilled that we were able to share that resource and work with you.
Yeah, thanks.
So great. So can you tell me, I mean, either one of you both, like what are some of the actual things that they're doing at that night or as a part of that course?
So I'll kind of share what we did, and then Colleen, you can add whatever adaptations you had. So we do start with a little bit of just general like attendance. Here's what you need to know on how not showing up to school might impact you long term. But we also do a lot of like empathy building and compassion work around those barriers to attendance, those kind of 4 strands of what might get in the way, right? Whether that's actual barriers, transportation, whatever, misconceptions, disengagement, like we do some work around that and have families identify what is really keeping them from being at school. And then we also do some education around our student information system. So in Murray, we use Aspire, and we have families log into Aspire and actually kind of look just at the snapshot of the last month to kind of get in the practice of checking absences. That's been really helpful. Most of our families haven't known that they could do that, or it has felt kind of clunky to them. And so improving on that skill set for families and students has been helpful. And then honestly, the majority of our time is spent, and I'm an LCSW, school social worker in practice. This is my first job in this particular position where I'm not directly engaging with students and families, but the majority of that course is like motivational interviewing, right? Like identifying goals, like big picture things, and then eventually putting in a plan, like what is your small goal that you want to work towards? Who are your support systems? Let's like pre-correct, because we know that things are going to get in the way. So what's going to get in the way and how can you work around those? And then how are you going to celebrate when you've achieved this goal? And then we also connect them with school level supports, because it's like, it's me, it's my student services director, and then those 2 attendance specialists who facilitate that course. And so we have some social workers come, we have some attendance, like mentors come from our schools. And if they don't have a school person there, we make sure that we're connecting them to those humans in their building so that they have someone following up on those goals that they've set.
That's great. It sounds really empowering too. And so then, Colleen, I'm assuming yours was very much the same, but more at the school level? Yeah. Did Colleen freeze for you guys? Okay, me too. So hopefully she'll pop back in. Aspen?
I can add in, I actually attended that one. And so some things that they did differently.
Yep.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Colleen.
Yeah, so the attendance mentors, so those attendance mentors were assigned.
Oh, man.
I know.
So they were able to, they paid their teachers to come and be mentors, as well as they had a large amount of interpreters. They paid everyone, and then they followed up. Each of those teachers that met with the families individually met again a month later, did a follow-up check-in with each family. So more individualized, just because they could be, because they're at a school, and they included like the staff that was already directly working with the students in that modality. So
That's really cool. I love too that both of you have data about the number of invites and who didn't come and who did, and how that turned out for them. It's really fascinating that just the invite alone was enough to kind of spark some movement for some people. We're going to answer a couple of questions from our audience, and if you are watching and have a question that didn't already get asked, feel free to plop it in the chat as well. So one question we have is, have we looked at data looking at the impact of the legislature's changes in attendance and how that has impacted the chronic attendance issues? So Aspen, that might be best positioned to you. Are we at a point to do that yet?
I guess I would have like follow-up questions about that question, as far as what legislation in particular. I'm guessing usually I get this question regarding the shifts in being able to refer students to court. So that's the legislation that was a big thing. It's shifted in the past 5 or 6 years several times, meaning we could, and then we couldn't, and then we could, then we couldn't, and then we can again, right? And so that feels really heavy, as far as like, oh, we have nowhere to go with these students. But the reality is we were referring very few students to court at any given point. That was a very minimally used system. And there was no data indicating it actually worked, meaning that once they were referred, that their attendance improved. And so now that's not to say that it didn't. There was just no data indicating that it did, right? And so it very well could have worked for some students. I think what we are really tracking is the impact of community-based resources being available, and there is legislation that's hoping to tie together those pieces, meaning that really there's 4 strands as far as why students don't attend. There's 4 kind of root causes or strands as far as why they're not coming. And one of those strands is solely based in community-based resources, meaning that the family needs access to better resources in order to attend. That's not something a school can typically engage with and help solve. And so that's where the court system would have fallen. That's where DCFS falls. And really, when schools were referring, they were referring to get additional support. It wasn't like we just want to sufficiently punish our students. It was we want to make sure that you know, we're out of options, we're out of resources, and we want for this family to be resourced. And so I would say that legislation, and it did just change again this recent session. I mean, you can again refer to court for our older students that are experiencing truancy. However, the parameters around that did just shift again. So we will be tracking that more closely as far as who's referred, at what point they're referred, and if that's useful. So we'll be able to have clearer data around that. And then the board rule that did just change last year, which did define chronically absent for the schools, has helped us have cleaner data around that. And then the legislation that really allowed for us to engage in systems building from the USBEM, collecting data on that as well. And so nothing quite yet, but I think that's probably where the questions are stemming from, as far as like, stop changing the rules on us so often so we can actually gain some stride, and we're trying. Yeah.
Well, I jump in and say, like, it would be really hard to answer a question like that, pre-pandemic to post-pandemic data, especially because all of these like changes in the law really happened around the pandemic. And so, you know, we just don't have common definitions for attendance, you know, attendance taking prior to the pandemic and prior to legislation. So we don't have comparable data really, where we could answer this question. So it would be very difficult to try to come up with some kind of causal inference. Because how do you separate, like, was it the legislation? Was it the pandemic? Was it something else? Like, it would be a really difficult question to answer.
Yeah, and Brooke, you looked at, I know when we were working in our attendance report around what are the definitions and how are they being recorded. And this is, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, the first year that UTREX has some of those specific designations around attendance. And so it's not that we're not looking at the data, it's that we just don't have it yet because that's on an annual reporting cycle.
Right. So now where we used to only get like a day's absent reported in UTREX at the state level. So when I say UTREX, I mean like all of our student information systems where we put our grades and attendance, like Aspire or Skyward or Power School, they're all feeding up to the state level nightly. They're sending data every night, and that's called UTREX. It's our data exchange. And so, you know, the state is getting their reporting from that nightly data exchange. And they also get a big year-end report where everything gets cleaned up and finalized and validated and say, yep, this is our data for the year. And so the attendance that you see reported on the USBE website or anything used at the state level is coming from that. So we've got data that we can look at, but as far as, you know, was it all defined the same way? Was it all collected the same way over time? Like, no, it wasn't. So it's kind of a caveat with all of that data, but we're getting there. We're going to be able to differentiate excused and unexcused absences going forward.
Yeah, and Nicole, I mean, we ran into that when you were looking for outliers to research as well, right? Like you'd like to believe that attendance data is they were here or they were not here, and it's clean and easy to pull from, but not necessarily.
Right. And the other, I mean, that was like related to the point that I made about looking at the school level and then also looking at the student level, because we know that those of us who've been in the classroom are, the student doesn't show, we mark them absent, and then we get busy teaching, and then they show, and then we're like, oops, we never went back and like mark them here. So how accurate is the data when teachers aren't managing it at the period? At the high school level, I mean, it's by period oftentimes. So what happens is, like, even when we're on campus with intervention specialists for attendance, we see, and Sierra, you might have had the same experience with your folks in attendance, when our attendance folks on campus are actually taking attendance, is more accurate than what it is when the teachers are reporting and calculating in their systems, because it's oftentimes that teachers will start their class period, and if they're not there, they're not there, and then they don't go back and change it. So it's an issue at the student level for period attendance, is an issue at the school level. And then as Brooke's explaining, I mean, when that all those apps get filtered into the state office and then out spits a report, I mean, we have some degree of error on all of our reporting.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing is it's very important for a teacher to take attendance and to be as accurate as they can with it. I know when I was in the classroom, like you said, you get teaching and it's easy to let go. But if we want to be accurate with it, it's only as good as what you put in.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
But I was just going to put another plug in for like the early warning systems that, we all have, but, Panorama in Jordan District, like that's kind of the value of Panorama as well, is that you are getting that immediate feedback. So I think just the more we can engage with it and the easier it is to get, like the better the data is going to get.
And I think too, something to think about is I think with a local control state, we're not going to ever be super accurate because every district still has different coding. And that's true. What's excused in Jordan may not be excused in Canyons, and that may always be true with how we're doing this. So our data's always going to be a little bit dirty, but I do think even going back to those kind of 4 strands of what makes students attend or what has them struggling to attend, we do actually have a lot of control over. And I think it's easy to kind of get lost, especially like in research. It's easy to, I'm a behaviorist. I love a very clear definition and a very clear way to like define and engage with the data. But I think, as far as what we're thinking about in schools and districts, one of the biggest things, and we've really shifted from absenteeism, and then we shift to the verbiage of attendance, and now we're shifting to the verbiage of engagement, right? Because if a kid's attending, but they're not engaged, that's not what we want. That's not actually what I want for us. I don't want them bored in a school day and attending like just because they're supposed to, right? So I think really thinking about engagement data as well as, and that is not dirty, right? Like we can go in and collect classroom-based data and say, okay, was that an engaging lesson? What did that look like? How did the teacher engage? What did the students, how many students, were answering questions during that time? And was there direct instruction and positive interactions and things like that? And so I think while, yep, the data's going to be important, it's always going to be dirty in our state. Like it just is. Like there's never a time where we're going to have clean data. But there is a time where we can make sure our classrooms are really engaging, right? And I think that's what we lost in the pandemic is we stopped engaging. Like it was everything went on virtual, right? And kids can access that. And we kind of lost that. What does an engaging classroom look like? And how do we give good instruction that makes the student want to be there and things like that? And so I think we need to hold tension for both of those, but really there's lots, and I think you heard it from Sierra and Colleen, like there's lots that we can do that are kind of untapped resources that we haven't had to engage in yet in this way. And so I want to be careful, like to not be like sometimes when I hear, well, the data's not good, okay, then I'm out, right? But like, nope, the data's not great, but it's clear enough that we know that we have a problem that we can address, and here are the ways that we address it.
Oh yeah, that's clear as a bell.
And to that point, Aspen, I mean, I think like the 3 big things that I'm taking away from this, I mean, one, we do want to track our data big scale, but then also small scale, like those interventions for each kid that we're trying, right? But the 3 big things I heard was using a benefit framing can be really powerful. Empowering our parents to understand how we're collecting the information and why it's so important and how we can help them overcome those barriers. And then 3, paying attention to what people are telling us are their leading indicators of why they're not showing up, not just the data on the back end that says, well, they weren't here. We will wrap up in just a second, but I'm going to take us back over to highlight just a couple of things from ULEAD before we end. So we've worked with Brooke, we're working with Nicole, we're working with others on attendance strategies that have worked. So that was one of the questions that we didn't get to, but very specific moves that people can make that are having a difference in their attendance data and what's working for them. And appreciate Colleen and Sarah sharing some of those specifics that they've engaged with. And then for our research teams in the crowd, we have some fact sheets. One that we'll be releasing around chronic absenteeism. And we have some schools that are making big improvements. And we want people to engage with those schools and find out what they're doing and how they can adapt that practice. We never talk ULEAD without mentioning our education innovation program. All of these materials are on our website, but this was funded by the legislature where you can get up to $5,000 per class or teacher, depending on how you want to look at that, to try something. And it gets approved at the local level. There's really not a lot of strings attached. But if you're thinking, oh, I want to try some of these family nights and I don't quite have the resource for it, this might be a place where you could get some of those resources for it. So just something to mention that you can find on the ULEAD website. So we hope that you'll visit us there. We're continually adding some of these topical practices and innovative practice reports around what's working for Utah schools. You can share with us what you're seeing from the field or what you need to learn more about. And we hope that you stay in contact with us through that as well. So before we go, I'm going to give you guys, if you could, one sentence sum up a strategy or an idea that people could put into action right away for attendance, what would you suggest that they do? Maybe we'll go reverse order. Sierra? Reverse alphabetical. It made sense in my mind.
Great. No, it's totally fine. I had a really hard time with this question, just caveat, because I was like, wait, one sentence right now that someone could do? Because a lot of the things we've seen success with have taken effort, right, on the front end. But I came up with something along the lines of, if our goal is to improve student attendance, then we need to be listening to and including those students in the conversation. And that conversation needs to be led with empathy and understanding, and making sure that those students and families feel seen and valued, not only in that conversation, but in their school environment as well.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Thank you. Nicole?
I happen to think that the theme that many of our colleagues talked about today was about inclusion, like connectedness and welcoming, and like having students included. And folks have said that even that invitation has made a difference in their data. So that aligns to research on belongingness. And I think that psychological engagement, belongingness, and inclusion are really practices that can be implemented tomorrow.
That's great. Colleen?
Same, communicating and with the families to find out what exactly the needs are and aligning those resources to match that. But I think the other thing that I would add is communicating what the overall goal is. I feel like you could, at this point, even ask one of my kindergartners and they would be able to tell you that our goal is 90% attendance and that we attend every single day that we can. So you can communicate that out to everyone, not just what we're working on, but also how we can support you.
That's awesome. Thank you. Brooke?
I would say, as far as the data goes, establish your source of truth for who is attending and who is not, and know how to get a report of who is attending and who is chronically absent. Because especially if you're in school leadership, you need to know where that data is and how you can grab it at any time that you need it.
That's great. And Aspen?
I would say greet students and families at the door. That's it. So systematically make sure that people are smiled at as they enter your school or classroom.
Yeah, simple move, but a big one. So, well, thank you. Thank everybody for attending. Thank you to our fantastic panelists for giving us some insight into what they are doing. And we will share this recording and some of the takeaways with you this week. So we hope that we will see you again with ULEAD and that you have your kiddos showing up tomorrow. Thank
Thanks.
you.